help them. And that's encouraging. And all of those people have Bible studies that they're doing. Now, a Bible study to you and I doesn't sound like a big deal, right? We have a Bible study Wednesday night. People come out. That's awesome. We're used to that. But imagine having a Bible study with unbelievers just because you ask them, hey, would you read the Bible with me? And they say, okay. But that's a big thing. How many times have you done that? Just go grab somebody from the mall. Hey, you want to read the Bible with me? Nah, it's not so comfortable, is it? But he's doing that. She's doing that. They're doing that. And they're praying that God will save someone, because we don't save anybody, do we? It happens in God's timing. And that's why when things happen to us, when we're in the middle of doing something, we know God wants us to do it, and then things happen. Like the car breaks down. You know, in their instance, their youngest son struggles with breathing. Every time he gets a little bit of a cough, they're worried. They have to go to the hospital, put him on breathing treatments. And it's happened number of times. And the girl started getting sick. And like, sickness is just part of life, right? Nobody knows when that's going to hit, or do they? Is God in control of that? Well, I'm glad somebody answered that question. I saw a few heads nodding, but I don't know. Is God in charge? Yeah, God's in control. You know, He's in control of flus and colds and coronavirus, and God's in control of these things. Now, does He let the devil use it? Yes. Are you going for a gold star? I may have to put you up here. No. Yes, of course. God's in control of all things, but He lets the devil use it, doesn't He? The devil uses everything. He uses colds. He uses flat tires. He uses when we drop equipment. He uses things that we don't think matter, or God didn't know this was going to. Yeah, He did. And He's using it, and the devil thinks he did it, right? We know that's true, because the devil came to God saying, hey, can I go do this to Job? And God said, go ahead. Can't kill him, but you can do that. And so does God do that with us? Yes. And the devil does things to us, and we get all upset. Oh, or we think we did it. Or we think somebody else did it. We get mad at them. And the Bible says, no, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We wrestle against spiritual authorities, don't we? So that's what we need to pray. So we need to be praying for them and praying for us, praying for each other all the time. Prayer is not a nothing. Thank you for putting that prayer list together. Gene and Kermit have put that together every week so we can pray for those things. We need to do that. We need to pray for one another, because details are details, but they're not meaningless. They all mean something. And we struggle. There's a reason for the struggle. God wouldn't let it happen if there wasn't a reason for the struggle, would He? He knows about everything. He knows about sailing magazines. He knows about postcards. All those details, God knows about all that stuff. And we don't. But we pretend we do. We don't. We'd like to. We're curious. Aren't we curious? Are you curious? Yes, you are. Well, you're all curious. And we want to know. Inquiring minds want to know, right? We want to know stuff. So Jesus knows that, of course. And so sometimes He tells us some things. So the passage we're going to look at today, Matthew 24, you can turn there now on your phone, your tablet, or whatever, your Gideon Bible, whatever. You need to turn it, because Matthew 24 is one of the most misunderstood passages in the entire New Testament. People use it to say all kinds of stuff that isn't true. False teachers false teach. Did you know that? False teachers teach false things, okay? So the way they trick us is they take something that's true and they twist it a little bit. We talked about that last week, didn't we? They pervert the truth. They flip it upside down. They do something with the truth that isn't true to make us have false ideas. So people take what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and they twist it just a little bit to make us think false things. So we're going to look at today Matthew 24, the first few verses, 14 verses, where Jesus is going to talk about the signs of His coming. The signs of his coming. Signs of the times are everywhere. You heard that song. We're talking about the signs. Signs of Jesus coming. And that's what they were asking Jesus. And so he gave them to them for a reason. We'll talk about that. But we often are seeking for a sign. And we have to remember that's not what we're supposed to do, right? Because who did he say seeks for a sign? It is a what generation? A wicked generation that seeks for a sign. The sign is not what we're supposed to seek. Signs are okay, but they always point to something else, right? You didn't go to remember those tourist traps you used to go to with your parents when you're traveling along the highway? Yeah? Did you not have a life? Come on, people. We drive down the highway and you see all these signs that point to something, right? But it's not the sign that you want. It's the destination that you want, right? Ice cream shop. I want the ice cream shop. I don't care about the sign that says where it is. I want the thing, the ice cream shop. That's what I want. I get frustrated every day when I come to work and there's a sign up on the corner with an ice cream cone on it. Have you not seen that sign? I see it. And I even went for it. I followed the sign. You know where it goes? It goes to the campground. And you get to the campground and you go inside and I'm thinking, ice cream, this is going to be great. They don't have any ice cream. They have, packaged. I could get that at Giant, ice cream sandwich or whatever, way overpriced. But it's in there. So they kind of have ice cream. All right. But it's not the sign that we want to seek for. It is the thing. Okay, now, so Jesus says there's signs of his coming. What are we supposed to look for? His coming. Very good. So don't look for the sign. Look for his coming. Okay, now, what are the signs? I knew you'd ask that question. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Matthew chapter 24. Now, the disciples with Jesus have been listening to him talking to the Pharisees and the scribes and about all the woes and the curses and the curse against Jerusalem that Jesus pronounced. Then we come to chapter 24. Jesus came out from the temple. What was he doing at the temple? Do you remember? Pardon? Woe. He pronounced the woes, but what else did he do in the temple? He cleansed it, right? He cleansed the temple, and they didn't like that. Then he taught the Pharisees. Every question they asked him, he answered it. They didn't like his answers. So Jesus came out from the temple, going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. Now, they'd been in the temple this whole time. But now that they're leaving it, they're seeing it from a different angle. And instead of being impressed with what Jesus said and what Jesus was going to do, what were they impressed with? The building. That's the way people are, right? This building that they've been building for generations and generations. In fact, it wasn't completed until about 6 years before it got destroyed. So the whole time Jesus was living, it was being built, being worked on, okay? Jesus may have even worked on some of the stones of the temple with his Father. So they come out and they're looking and they're fascinated by those huge stones in the temple, the gold. Do you realize how much gold there was there? A lot of gold. There was so much gold in the temple, that's what the Romans destroyed the temple for. They wanted to get that gold. And they knew the only way to get that gold is to light the whole place on fire, burn it, and melt the gold off, and then they had to take the stones off one by one and throw them over the side so they could get the gold off. That's how much gold there was. That's why it's such a beautiful, you can see it from miles away. And he said to them, as they're pointing out the temple, Jesus, look at this temple. This is awesome. This temple. Now wait a second. What was the purpose of the temple? To worship God. The temple is a sign or a symbol of God who was sitting with them. God was sitting with them, wasn't he? So, were they impressed with God or the sign? They were impressed with the sign. It's like a sign pointing to me and you saying, isn't it awesome, that sign? That'd be stupid. Okay, but that's what people do. Instead of thinking of God and focusing on God, we focus on symbols, things that talk about God. Well, they had Jesus sitting with them, and they asked him the question, Do you not see all, look at this temple. What about this? Isn't this awesome? And Jesus says to them, do you not see, verse 2, all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left on another, which will not be torn down. Not one stone. Now, did they believe that when he said it? No, they did not believe it, because they'd spent their whole life watching it getting built. And still today, we don't know exactly how they did that. We don't know. How did they move stones without a crane? The 60-foot long block. How did they put that exactly where it's supposed to go? And the fit and the finish was so wonderful. How did they do that? So when Jesus said that, not one stone's going to be on another. They're all going to be tossed. They kind of dismissed that. Okay, he doesn't know engineering, Do we do that to God sometimes? God makes a promise to us, and we say, "Yeah, I believe it, kind of, but does God really know about all the details of my life?" Yeah, He does. He does. So they didn't know, but he says not one's going to be on another because it's all going to be judged. The point isn't the temple. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciple, that's later. Where's the Mount of Olives? Right next door. Okay, just outside the city. You go out the gate and down the valley, and there's a little hill, and that's Mount of Olives. And there's a valley there in between, and it's full of graves. You know why it's full of graves? People died. Give that man a gold star. Okay. Yes, because people died. Why are they buried right there? Because they want to be the first ones there when the Messiah comes. All the prophecies talk about Messiah coming to Jerusalem, coming in that gate, and they say, "Well, I want to be raised and see Messiah when he comes in." Right there. That's what the disciples thought. That's what all these people thought, and people still today think that, and so they all still want to be buried there when the Messiah comes. And Jesus is sitting there, and he says to them, they're asking him, "Tell us, when will these things happen?" Like, you're talking about tearing down the temple. We figure that's got to be when the Messiah comes to destroy the enemy, right? And then he'll take power. Okay, when will this be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Age of what? This horrible, troubled life that they were in, right? Persecuted by the Romans and all that. When's the end of this and when's the beginning of that? What's going to be the sign? Tell us a sign to look for. Once again, what are we supposed to look for? Messiah, God. Are we supposed to look for a sign? No. They're saying, tell us a sign to look for. In other words, what can we... when your kids want to know if you'll just wake them up at the last second? They don't care about what's going to happen. Just wake us up at the last second. It's like an alarm clock or something. Who has an alarm clock? Does it work? Yeah. Very good. Got to be plugged in. I had my alarm clock set this morning to go off. It was set right and everything. But it didn't matter because my dog started barking just before that. So anyway, Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name." So he starts going into the signs. So what I'm going to give you right now are 6 signs of the Messiah's coming. But what the disciples didn't know is that Jesus is talking about what they asked for, but they didn't know what they were asking for. Okay? He's going to tell them what the signs are going to be for the coming of Christ to the earth in power to take over. All right? He's going to give them the signs for that. These are things that are going to happen. But it's different than they're thinking, because I think often about what Jesus had to be going through his mind when the disciples said the things that they said to him all the time. Like, who's sitting with them right there? The Messiah, right? Who's sitting with them? Okay. I can't hear your head shake. Who's sitting there with him? Jesus, the Messiah. Okay. And their question is, when's the Messiah coming? Would you be insulted by that? How many times did Jesus told them he's the Messiah? All over and over and over. I am, right? Peter, who am I? You are the Christ, the Son of the... They even admitted it, and yet they go to him, when's the Messiah coming? He didn't get frustrated with them. I don't know how. He doesn't get frustrated with us. I don't know how. Does God get frustrated with us? No. It's amazing. It's amazing the patience he has with us. But the disciples said to him, when is the Messiah coming? All right. He says, I know what you're really asking for is when do I come in power to take over everything? So I'll tell you about that, but you don't really understand what you're asking. But he doesn't say it. That's a little sidelight, right? So he's going to do that. He's going to give them the signs. Now these signs are things that are going to take place over time. Some of these signs are going to take place in a way pretty quick after his death and resurrection. But they're going to be fulfilled completely in the long run. Okay? Because when does Jesus come in his power to take over everything in the kingdom? When does the kingdom physically actually happen? Has it happened yet? No. So it's still future for us. If it's still future for us, is it future for them? Very good. So let's look at what he says. See to it that no one misleads you. Verse 4. First thing, I don't want you to be misled. Okay? For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, see that you are not frightened. For those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes, but all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Now I want you to lock on to verse 8. All these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Now, that phrase, birth pangs, is a phrase that they locked onto immediately, as soon as he said it. In old Jewish thinking, when you were looking for the Messiah, reading through all the prophets, the phrase birth pangs was a phrase that was used for the coming of the Messiah. So when you saw these things, you know you're supposed to, Messiah's going to be here, okay? Now, how many of you ladies have had birth pangs? Not right now. I mean, sometime in the past. How many of you had children? You had some children. You understand birth pangs, right? Okay, so you need to know that. You'll have to explain this to your husband later. Does he understand it? More now than used to. See, my dad, when the kids were born, where did my dad go? They didn't even let the men in. The men went off in another room somewhere. Do what you want to do till the baby's born, right? They didn't get to do what I got to do. Be right there every time, through the whole process. And the wife goes through a lot, to put it bluntly, okay? There's birth pangs. Now, are those pangs pleasant? Are those birth pains pleasant? No, not pleasant at all. And they have a frequency. And this is what I want you to think about, frequency. Because when they start, who knows when they're going to start, right? When do you have your first labor pain, ladies? It might have been a month before the birth. How many times they went, whoa? They talk to the doctor and he says, that's a labor pain, it's normal, it's fine. You aren't having a baby yet. Sometimes women have a few labor pains and they go to the doctor and says, no, you're not having it, go home. I want to have it. No, go home. I'm 2 weeks overdue. No, go home. Why? Because the birth pangs have to start increasing in frequency. It's not when the first birth pang happens. It's not when the second one happens. If the birth pangs are a day apart, you're not ready for birth. If the birth pangs are 2 hours apart, you're not ready for birth. If the birth pangs are half an hour apart, you're not ready for birth. If the birth pangs are 5 seconds apart, I hope you live close to the hospital. Jesus uses real terms, okay? The birth pangs idea was an Old Testament idea that talked about the Messiah. So when he said birth pangs, They locked on because they understood he was saying the Messiah, when Messiah comes, is when these birth pangs are right on top of each other. Okay? Now, what a lot of Christians misunderstand is they think that there are certain signs, and when they see that sign, that means Jesus is coming today. That's not true. What the Bible tells us is that when you see these things increasing and increasing and increasing, that the Messiah, Jesus, is coming. And so we ought to be aware of these things increasing. Not that we're looking for one sign, so that when we see that sign, we know, oh, this is it. No. But when these things are increasing and increasing, you need to be aware that he's coming. Now, are there any signs that have to happen before Jesus can come? No. They've all happened, all right? And they're increasing, aren't they? How close together are they going to get before he? I don't know. We don't know. But he has told us that he's coming, and he didn't even know at the time when that would be. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But he says, I don't even know the time. Father hasn't told me that yet. Wouldn't it be great, ladies, if the doctor would have told you like 9 months ahead, right? You're going to have your baby on September 5th at 3 o'clock. Well, it kind of be good and kind of bad, right? Because no, but they don't do that unless it's going to be cesarean, right? Which they still don't even know that, But they didn't do that. And Jesus didn't do that. He wants us to be aware of his coming, not looking for a sign, but aware that they're increasing and that he's coming. That's what he wants us to be aware of. So let's look at what the signs are. The first one that he talks about, you see right away in verse 5, is deception. The first one is deception. And the deception was already happening in Jesus' time, wasn't it? There were many false Christs. There were people that come out and say, I am the Messiah. And they weren't the Messiah. And has that ever ceased? No. That's continued all the way through until today, that all you have to do is turn on your TV, and there'll be people there that are trying to convince you that they are the answer to all your problems. They're everything. And they could be politicians, they could be teachers, they could be spiritual gurus up on a mountaintop. There's people that are saying that I'm it. It's all about me. Look at me. And some will even come right out and say, I'm Jesus. I've had people tell me that. I had a guy one night that was convinced he was Jesus Christ. And I had to tell him he wasn't. For many will come in my name, saying I'm Christ. So the first thing is deception. Now there's lots of kinds of deception. There's the deceivers that tell you they're Christ. There's the deceivers that just tell you the truth twisted a little bit to get something from you. And there's people that just don't have a clue. But they're twisting the truth. You will be hearers of other things. So that's the first one, deception. What's our response to that? Our response to that is to beware. We just need to beware. There's going to be a lot of deception. Don't get fooled by every preacher you hear. Don't get fooled by everybody that says that they have something that you need. Don't get fooled. The only way to know that what they're saying is wrong is by what? Knowing the truth. And you don't have any excuse. You've all had access to Bibles your entire lives. Some people don't have that. People in China, there's a lot of people in China that don't have a Bible and never have. And they might hear one page or one verse in their entire life. But we don't have that excuse. We have Bibles. We need to be reading them. We need to know the truth so that when someone comes in with a false teaching, we know it right away. So the first thing is deception. Second thing, wars. Not one war, not 5 wars, but wars and wars and wars and wars, okay? He says, you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened. So why do the Christians get frightened? We get frightened about this war happening somewhere, trouble happening somewhere. And you know when wars are going to end? Not till heaven. Not till heaven. Even in the kingdom at the end there's going to be a war, isn't there? So not till heaven will war stop. So what he's trying to tell us is, hey, there's going to be wars. Just get used to the idea. There's going to be wars, and wars. That's just one of the things. Don't be frightened. For these things might take place? No, must take place. Okay? So don't think God's out of control when wars and remember, these people were living during the time of the Romans. There was an awful lot of warfare, wasn't there? And he says, I'm in control. These things have to happen. They're going to happen. Don't be frightened. They're going to happen. But that's not yet the end, okay? Don't think because I remember people tell me that during World War II, a lot of people were convinced that's it. Christ has to come. This is the worst it could get. Wrong. It got a lot worse. It'll keep getting that way. So don't think that just because things look bad, that's it. No, that's just one of the things, right? Got to happen. Verse 7. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes, and that's the third thing, devastation. There's going to be devastation. Now you can read in a couple places. You can write down to look at Daniel chapter 11 and Zechariah chapter 14 and Haggai chapter 2. Those three things. Daniel 11, Zechariah 14, Haggai chapter 2. All three of those places, if you look at them, give a very specific, detailed description of wars and wars and wars and wars and kingdoms rising against kingdoms and nations against nations. God already told us about it. Isn't that great? You don't have to watch CNN. God already has it. Here's the news for 2,000 years from now. He told us exactly what's going to happen and who's going to fight against who. It's all in there. He says, don't be frightened. That's all part of the plan. It's going to happen. But the third thing is what Christians get a little shook about, and that's shaking. In fact, in Haggai, he says, I will shake the nation, doesn't he? And that's what he's going to do. He's going to shake the world. And it's going to happen more and more often. So there are not going to be less earthquakes in the world. There's not going to be less volcanoes in the world. There's not going to be less tsunamis in the world. Doesn't matter what you do to try to change the climate. Forget it. God already said there's going to be more, and more. Okay? It's going to happen because who's in control? He is. He's in charge. Should we be frightened by that? No. I mean, the worst thing it can do is kill us. Wouldn't that be horrible? No. It'd be great because I'd be in heaven, right? So don't be frightened. There's no reason to be frightened. God's in control. He's doing all these things. So there's going to be famines. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be devastation. That's the third thing. So deception, wars, devastation. What's the fourth thing? Deliverance. Now don't think that's a good word. It's not. Deliverance is a bad word. Deliverance in the Bible, in the New Testament, meant arrest. You are going to be arrested. You're going to be delivered by someone else. So Jesus in the garden was delivered, wasn't he, to the chief priest? He was delivered. So we see that in verse 9. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations because of my name. So that's pretty bad. You're going to be delivered. And who's going to deliver you? The Bible tells us in other places, the people that are going to deliver you for arrest are going to be your own family. Your own children, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. That's who's going to deliver you. So a whole church body might be worshiping the Lord together over in China or North Korea, and all of a sudden the troopers come storming in, and how did they hear? Because someone in their midst betrayed them. Does God know that's going to happen? Yeah, it's in his plan, okay? He already planned that out, all right? So how do we pray about that? You pray that the people will be strong in that. That's how you pray. Pray that you don't say, God, don't ever let this happen, because he already told us it will. Okay? Don't pray for God to not do things he said he would do. All right? Pray for God to make us able to handle that we can be courageous and strong as a Christian when that happens. Okay? So, he says that's going to happen. Now, how often is this going to happen? Remember what he said? Birth pangs? It's going to happen more and more and more. Not less. More. It's going to happen more and more before he comes. All right? Now, verse 10. At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. So this is the fifth sign, the defection of false believers. So what happens is when persecution increases, pretending decreases. So when you have a number of people that say they're Christians, and it starts getting tough, people turn, don't they? People turn. So people that aren't really Christians, they're going to say, well, why put up with this? I don't want this to happen to me. So it's a very dangerous thing for Christians to want a comfortable life. Because when the comfortable life leaves, the Christians leave too, which means they weren't really Christians, were they? How do you know a real Christian? He stays, no matter what. He stays. So many people, he says many people. So don't be surprised when one Christian betrays other Christians, because he says it's going to happen. In fact, don't be surprised if many Christians betray other Christians. That's what he says is going to happen. It's going to increase. Now, you don't hear that in prosperity teaching, do you? No, because that doesn't go together. But the Bible says this is what's going to happen. The number one reason the church grows is persecution. Persecution. So Jesus allows persecution so that the gospel can go forth, which is what happens in verse 13. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. The one who endures. Jesus is calling on us to endure. So he doesn't say, go out there and look for a sign. When you see a sign, you know it's it. No. He said, don't look for signs. Look for Jesus. Because when these things happen, what are you going to need? Jesus. A sign isn't going to do you any good, is it? When we're struggling, and we're attacked, and we're in desperation, a sign won't help us at all. What will help us is Jesus. So we need to be seeking Jesus. The one who endures to the end, he will be saved. Verse 14, and this one's awesome. Because this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, where you see that described in detail is in Revelation chapter 6. If you study this on your own, and you go into Revelation chapter 6, which is during the tribulation period, when God is letting all the signs pile on top of each other. So when we're talking about birth again, women, that's transition. Remember, transition is at the end of that birth. All the birth pains have been increasing. You come at that. This is it. Time for the birth, right? That's what the tribulation period is. It's the transition, okay? So all that pain, all that suffering, all that persecution comes together. And in Revelation 6, we have the seals are being torn off the document of the ownership of the earth. And the Lord's coming, and he comes into Jerusalem, and it says that there's great earthquakes in the city of Jerusalem. There'll be great earthquakes, and a third of the city will be destroyed, and many people will die. Why is that happening? Because he's coming. It's got to happen. And so that's what turns. Then the enemy comes, and they surround Jerusalem, and they're ready to destroy it, and it looks like there's no hope, and that's when Jesus comes in. And he saves Israel. And that's what's talked about in verse 14, because that's the moment at which the gospel will be preached through the entire world. Now, how's he going to do that? Like, up until this period of time in history, that would almost be impossible, wouldn't it? How could you preach the gospel in the whole world? I mean, we try our best, we send missionaries everywhere, and when the gospel is preached in the last country, then Jesus comes. That's not what it means. When the gospel is preached in the entire world, then he's coming. At the end of the tribulation period, the Bible tells us that God's going to send an angel. First of all, he's going to send 144,000. They're going to go out and preach the gospel. Then he's going to send the 2 witnesses. Remember them? And the witnesses die, and he raises them up again. And the gospel is preached through them. But at the last moment, what he's going to do is send an angel. And that angel, at one moment, is going to preach the gospel to the entire world at once. Find it in the Bible. It's in there. You find it in the book of Revelation. And he's going to send that angel to preach the gospel. And when he's done that, the end. That's when Jesus comes. And then it'll be too late. So as we see the signs increasing, are the signs increasing? Yeah. Yeah. Is that a good thing? Yeah. That means he's coming. Okay, but what does that mean for those who aren't saved? Time is short. Time is short. It's time. It's time to give your life to Jesus right now because you don't know when that day is. All you know is it's increasing. Because wouldn't people love it if God set a date? July 14th. That's the day I'm coming. So what are the people in the world going to do? Live it up until the 13th, right? Is that what he wants us to do? No. We're going to live for him until he comes. So don't seek for signs. Signs point to Jesus. We need to seek Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that you love us so much. Help us to seek after you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And help us be encouraged by the signs we see, that they tell us it's coming. You're still at work. You're working in every detail of life. And there's nothing that happens in the world that should frighten us in any way. We don't have to be frightened. We know you're in control. So help us to have the courage to serve you in faith. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a wonderful day.